A small group today. Is everybody there? Are we ready to start? I think there are two memorable dates, but we'll go back to the to ancient history for the Cathiard domain. But there are two particular dates in my mind. Anyway, before we get to those, the great-grandfather of the current incumbent of Sebastien appeared in Burgundy from Savoy, up in the mountains. And he started working for various wine producers, and then after a while he managed to get a little bit of a few vineyards for himself, because in those days vineyards cost almost nothing. I remember Etienne Griveau's aunt Jacqueline saying that the price to buy an ouvre of Musigny, and an ouvre would be enough to give you somewhere between half a barrel and 1 barrel, but the price was the sort of cash equivalent of a barrel of that year's wine. And how that's changed. So an ouvre nowadays is sort of north of 2 million euros an ouvre, so 50 million a hectare or more. Anyway, so he managed to get a few vineyards, and also working for a few other growers in the area. And this was by now André Cathiard, father of Sylvain. And you may occasionally see old wines from Domaine, either marked as André Cathiard or else as Domaine Cathiard Molinier. And at a vertical tasting we did once in London with a collector who'd found all sorts of old bottles around the place, two which stood out from the earlier period were the Malconsorts from 1949 and 1976. Both of those were in cracking form. But obviously, once you've got to that sort of age, it is a question of bottle by bottle. But nobody was paying a lot of attention to this domain. André's son, Sylvain, joined him to begin with, and it wasn't a particularly easy father-to-son relationship. So Sylvain then started making a few wines on his own. But in 1985, his father retired. Sylvain came back and took on all the vineyards that had been collected together by then. And he was also working for people called Thomas Moyard, who had a big holding of Malconsorts, and Sylvain Cathiard was acting as the sharecropper, looking after vineyards and getting some grapes from there. But that came to an end in 2005 when Thomas Moyard sold up, and those vineyards went some to Domaine Dujac and some to Domaine de Monti. So what Sylvain got instead, as a form of sort of thank you for the work he'd done, plus buying him out of his agreement, was that he got the chance to take on some Nuits Saint-Georges au Murgers. So from 2006, au Torre from 2006, he has that vineyard added to his range. However, we've gone past the moment when I really got interested in this domain, and it was when I had sold my own private importing business to Berry Brothers in 2003. There were a couple of growers who I didn't really know who were on the Berry's list, who were Domaine Sylvain in Gevrey-Chambertin and indeed Cathiard in Romanee. So I got to taste the wines, and in particular, I fell absolutely in love with the Cathiard wines from the 2000 vintage, which explains why you've got some today. We had them also in an early version of our Bergfest tastings, and the 2000 Malconsorts, in fact, all the 2000 wines that were in that tasting from Cathiard absolutely stole the show. And as you know, 2000 is not a particularly revered Burgundy vintage, but we thought it was so brilliant that it completely changed my way of thinking. Since then, I've gone back and I've tasted some 99s, which are remarkable as well. And Sylvain himself really dates the moment when he felt he was getting everything right from 1997. But you'll be lucky if you find much available in the marketplace from those older vintages. Now, the other date I have in mind, which Mr. Michael Volmerish will certainly remember, was when he and a few chums from Hong Kong came to London for a lunch at Berry Brothers, in which everybody brought a bottle of wine from a certain other domain in Romanee, Domaine La Romanee Conti. And sadly, there was a particular bottle of Romanee Vivant 2000, which somebody had brought, which was corked. So I caught Simon Berry's eye and then whispered in his ear and said, we've got some of Cathiard's 2000 Romanee Vivant somewhere on the premises. Shall I go and get a bottle and we'll serve that? So we served that blind. And as Michael will tell you, it pretty much stole the show. People were absolutely astonished by the quality. And there's one of those moments when conversation rather stops and everybody's fiddling with their telephones under the table, trying to place orders wherever they could find it. Have I told the story truly, Michael?
Absolutely, as accurate as ever.
Yeah. I mean, the good thing is that it introduced Cathiard to you and to others. The bad thing, of course, is that any impetus like that is one of the things that helps to change the market and send prices higher. Never mind. But you managed to buy some, and you've got 3 of the 2000s straight up. Have they been poured yet? Yes, I think they have. I can see colour in your glasses. So if you want to have a little taste of those, and while you're tasting, I'll tell you about the 3 vineyards which were involved. Just changing my view so I can see you a little bit more clearly. Let's have a look. So you have got, I don't know which order they are, but the suggested tasting order would be the Nuits Saint-Georges Murgers 2000, then the Malconsorts 2000, then the Romanee Vivant 2000, assuming that you're starting with the older wines, starting with the Cathiard wines, the Sylvain Cathiard wines. So, the Domaine has got 1 Grand Cru, small amount of Romanee Vivant. It's got 4 Vosne Romanee Premier Crus, Malconsorts, Souchot, Orvaux, and Regnault. And then it's got 2 Nuits Saint-Georges Premier Crus, which are Au Murgers and Au Torre. And Torre is nice. It's a vineyard that's close in to Nuits Saint-Georges itself. Attractive wines. But if you see them side by side, then you're probably going to prefer the Murgers, which is made from very old vines. They are probably 75-year-old vines by now, and they have nearly half a hectare, 0.48, which is enough to mean you can make a proper amount of wine. I'll come on to the sort of details of the winemaking perhaps when we, in between the Sylvain Cathiard and the Sebastien Cathiard wines, so that we can see what the differences were. Now, Au Murgers, though it's in Nuits Saint-Georges, is up towards the border with Vosne Romanee, which has the result of wines with that extra elegance and charm and hedonistic pleasure that you get out of Vosne Romanee, but also with the weight and structure and power that you get from Nuits Saint-Georges. So I think that area with Boudot, Murgers, La Richemone is a pretty special part of the world. Now, we met in January 2018, some of us, to do a Cathiard event, and very sadly, there were 2 bottles out of condition, which were the Murgers 2000 and the Romanee Vivant 2000. So I hope you're having better luck with them today. Are they all as they should be, Michael? Or anyone?
Looking good. Looking good.
No, that evening that we had together was lovely, because the good wines were absolutely great, but disappointing in a couple of the star wines. And it is true that there was a much higher incidence of corked bottles in the 2000 vintage from Cathiard than I would like. I have seen them elsewhere also. So then you have Malconsorts, and in a sense, I think it was the triumph of the Cathiard Malconsorts that really put this vineyard on the map, because there are nice wines from Bichot, from La Marche, from Hudelot-Noëlard, that's a very small holding, and then of course more recently de Monty and Dujac. But the vineyard didn't have the reputation and the pricing that it has today until firstly the Cathiard wines were taken note of worldwide, and secondly the Dujac and de Monty wines came on the market. And now of course Malconsorts is a different price level to where it was, and many people consider it to be pretty much Grand Cru in quality. It certainly would be a candidate if Vosne Romanee needed any more Grand Crus, but they have enough already, one could say. So Malconsorts remains, I would say, the real flagship of the estate, even though, of course, they do have Romanee Saint-Vivant. They have 3/4 of a hectare, 0.74, planted in 1971, so already becoming more or less mature by the time of 2000, and certainly the more recent wines you're going to taste beginning to be quite old vines. And for me, it was always a standout. And when I'm tasting the wines there in barrel, some years I can see a proper uplift for the small holding of Romanee Saint-Vivant. They only have enough to make about 3 barrels. They've got 0.17, and it's really old vines, actually, 75-year-old vines, 80%. But in other years, I find the excitement of the Malconsorts almost wins the day between the two of them. So yeah, it's either or, but certainly the Malconsorts is truly extraordinary when it's on form for a Vosne Romanee Premier Cru, I would say. So yes, you've got the 3 together, and I would expect them to be agreeably maturing, but by no means falling off their perches. So the maybe I hear back from you, and then talk about it a bit more. Who's ready to offer an opinion?
All very good. I mean, like, all very balanced, like, elegant, yet, packs a punch in the end. I think the mouth is a little, probably has a little bit more, it's a little bit more powerful in the mouth. Obviously, is a little, it would be more elegant, but it's really well made.
Yeah.
Exceptional.
Okay, so remembering this is a vintage which in general we thought when it first came out that you needed to drink it fairly early, sort of 5, 7, 8 years. Then after the 5, 7, 8 years, we thought, well, it's a really nice vintage, but for drinking early, drink in the next couple of years. And ever since we've been saying drink in the next couple of years, and it never lies down. I mean, Christophe Rumier's Amoureuses 2000 drunk on Friday took half an hour in the glass really to get where it needed to get to, and so it's still developing really, really well. So I think because you've got the 3 of them together in a vintage that was classic for Sylvain, it really displays his style. So when the wines were young, they always had a very vibrant color, fresh purple, medium density, didn't get black colors, not so much red, it was very much purple. And you got this extraordinarily beautiful, vibrant, quite sort of hedonistic, fresh fruit style on the bouquet. And then again, this immense charm on the palate. And the structure of the wine would never get in the way. There was a lot of new oak being used then. In fact, for the wines you've got, possibly not the Nuits Murgers, but the other 2 wines would be 100%, and maybe the Nuits as well, would have been 100% new barrel. Barrels all from one cooper in a style that suited Cathiard's winemaking, which is interesting because the cooper is called Remond, R-E-M-O-N-D, and this was the cooper that Faveley made a little bit of a show of getting rid of in 2007 when the new team took over at Faveley, and they sort of blamed the over-tannic style of the previous generation wines on the barrels that came from Remond, whereas Cathiard was using the same barrels, or at least the same producer of barrels, and was making these wines of extraordinary elegance and no rough tannins at all. So who knows? One thing I would say about the Sylvain Cathiard style is I found the wines absolutely sensational from very early on, and I was never quite sure how well they would age and whether they would do the wonderful thing which is worth paying lots of money for, which is develop additional layers of fruit later on when the wines became aged, whether they would build complexity, build secondary and then tertiary aromas. or whether the joy of them was in that first stage. And there may be an element of that. I would expect your 2000s have all held up very well, but I'm not sure that they will have developed sort of multi-layers of fruit. I mean, you tell me, but do you get the impression that it is more one particular fruit style that's dominating?
Jasper, I don't think that. I think they're doing better than holding up. I think these have, you know, years, you know,
Years ahead. Good.
they definitely do.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to let them develop in the grass. I think there's probably going to be, you know, more coming out of it. I think it's just kind of starting like right now as we're drinking it.
I'm looking at the glasses, Jasper. So if you look at the 2000s, you start to see ever so slight bricking on the edges.
Yeah.
The 09s are still pretty rock solid, but there's a delicacy, a savory delicacy I find in the wines that is different to, let's say, your Romanee Conti or DRC or Loire. Do you use stems?
Well, yeah, this is key, of course, because the two others you mentioned are famous for using stems and up to 100%. And Cathiard's the other way. Not a single stem is allowed in, so it is 100% destemmed. So the use of the new oak and the destemming puts you closer to the general style of Henri Jayer than it does to DRC or Loire. Yeah. And I think that's fair enough. Is there any feeling? I didn't think so in tasting his 2000s. You could tell that they had used new oak, but I never felt that the wines were over oaked. You never got anything drying. It's the sort of oak that gives you a little vanilla addition to the flavor, but not toasted.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Good. Let's have a look and see. So on that famous night when we had a couple of corked bottles, we even then. So this was in January 2018, in One Chai, 26th of January. Checking my notes. We noted then that the color was just beginning to mature in the Malconsorts. Malconsorts wasn't really showing any weakness, but you could just tell that beginning of that light bricking. Real depth of fruit for this vintage. Again, I felt reaching maturity, but not aging unduly. And we did also find that the wine gained additional depth and succulence in the glass. So there was more still to add, as you're finding now, 4.5 years later. So yeah, the final mouthful was in another league, I noted. I thought it might have been approaching its optimum, but sounds like it's still with us in the room. In your room, at any rate. I have a cup of tea here. Never mind. So have you also taken a look? So the other two wines, 2009. I'll just continue forwards. I think after 2000, I didn't see a lot of his 01s, but they were decent. 2002 is very nearly as good as 2000. They were sort of real breakthrough vintages for Sylvain. And then after that, 3 and 4 were, of course, slightly odd vintages. 2005, I think, is a wonderful vintage, and his wines were sensational. And then by this time, his fame was becoming much wider, and Berry Brothers used to get a huge allocation of his wines, and then it got steadily diminished as more and more markets needed looking after. We still probably got one of the bigger allocations, but everybody was getting smaller. And I haven't recently tasted the 2009s. As you know, it's a vintage which I believe in. It became a little bit less fashionable because people felt the wines were maybe a bit overripe and or had too many tannins. I wouldn't accuse the Cathiard wines of having either of those things, but they will certainly be more heavily structured, more muscular wines in 09 than in 2000. And you've got the two top wines, Romanee Vivant and Malconsorts. How are those two showing?
I find they're not as perfumed as the RSV, but they have the house style is very clear.
Right. So yeah, but you've got an RSV and a Malconsorts. Is that right in 09?
Yeah, we do.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. But you're saying not as perfumed as the 2000.
What I mean, no. What I mean, yeah, well, the 2000s is definitely more open. I think the 09, and I'd be curious your view of Jasper on the 09s versus 10s at Cathiard. But I find them denser and richer.
Yeah, but I mean, this is in general, because 10s have been lovely to drink at a relatively early age. The vintage has got a reputation that has grown and grown. And because 09s have been a little bit backward, a little bit tight, people haven't been talking about it so much. But I really believe in the longer term that 09 is going to be the winner. The 09s will be sort of 15, 25 years from now, will still be fabulous with energy, and 10s will have gracefully declined.
Right. The RSV is definitely more ready now to drink than the Mal. The Mal will need that. It will need some time.
Yeah,
it's good. Yeah, but it just needs more.
I mean, the Romanee Vivant should be effortless. It should just sort of keep on going all the way through. But the Malconsorts is something which has got a little bit more muscular structure. So I think Malconsorts is the other side of La Tâche, and La Tâche is always more tannic, the most tannic, if you like, for me, of the DRC wines. Whereas Romanee Vivant, I find pretty consistent in wine style through all the different producers. Sure, their own way of doing it is going to make a difference, but I don't think there is a noticeable difference depending on where you are within RSV holdings. Malconsorts, certain patches have more clay and certain patches have a bit more sand in them.
Jasper, you've managed to try a lot of Malconsorts over the years. What do you find as the ideal spot within the vineyard?
Well, I'm not sure because I mean, the Cathiard you would think must have, simply because the wines are until Demonty and Dujac came along, the wines are the most concentrated of all. I think if you get towards the southern end, which is where you have the two La Marche parcels, plots, which, as from 2022 vintage, will go to Compligé-Bellard, and you have the Bichot holdings, and you could probably put Hulot-Norla in that area. I think there's probably a little bit more sand, and they're probably slightly lighter in terms of their potential. Whereas Cathiard is absolutely in the center, but in the upper part. Below him is Demonty and Dujac, and then north of him, getting close to La Tâche, is also Demonty and Dujac. Their plots are not all in single blocks; they're more scattered around. But I think it was when we first tasted Cathiard that the wine seemed to be in a different register. But I have no reason to think, from my general conversations, that his plot should be better than the others. I mean, it is clearly, in most years, his top wine of his four. So his typical serving order used to be start with the Regnault. Now, most people, if you were told Malconsorts, Suchot, Orvaux, Regnault, you'd love all four of those vineyards, but you might perhaps expect Regnault to be the very best. And then Orvaux would be second. So on Orvaux is a rather cooler slot. Then Les Suchots, which is the smallest holding of the four, and then Malconsorts at the top. If I had to rank them, and particularly in more recent years in hotter vintages, and perhaps this is also under Sebastien's period, I think the Orvaux is the other outstanding wine along with the Malconsorts. Regnault is getting steadily better as the vines get older. They were only planted in 1996, so even now they're not yet 30 years old. Suchot is the one which I find a little bit not trickier, but it doesn't quite have the majesty for me of Malconsorts and Orvo in the more recent years. Yeah, so there's a sort of a view across the Premier cruise. He also makes very nice. Well, I'll come on to the other vineyards maybe when we switch and we start talking about Sebastien. Any other thoughts that you'd like to develop, me to develop on the Sylvain time?
How did he do in the more tricky vintages, like 04?
I think pretty good actually from memory, and I don't think he had the sort of the green meanies very much in 04. And okay, let's talk about why he made such good wines, because I have a suspicion we used to get pretty much the same allocation every year until he started reducing our share. I've got a suspicion that the vines were fairly fully cropped, not ridiculously high levels, but nonetheless the yields were reasonably high, which doesn't detract from the charm, but occasionally would make them have a little less intensity. I don't know that's the case. He was never somebody who was ever comfortable about discussing things like crop levels or indeed techniques, apart from the simplest, the key things like destemming everything and the new oak levels. But what I think he did have is just a natural touch, what the English gardeners call green fingers, or the French saying I'm a green hand. And he just fallen into a style that worked perfectly for him. So they were really very, very consistent year in, year out. I don't especially remember a vintage in which I felt disappointed by the wines, though obviously you get greater concentration in an 05 or an 09 than you do in a 7 or 8 or 4. So then the big question was, what would change when Sebastien came on board? And though in many ways the sort of nicest man in the world, I don't think the family relationships were particularly easy between Sylvain, and they hadn't been with his father, and I think they were difficult for a while with his son Sebastien. It became clear that once it was Sebastien's turn to take over, he needed to take over completely. It wasn't ever going to be easy for the two to work side by side. So Sylvain took his retirement after the 2010 vintage, and Sebastien came in 2011. So what's he changed? The vineyard work has moved to organic, though it's not certified. But from 2014, he began earlier in the Regno, but from 2014, all the vineyards have been run effectively organically. He's reduced the amount of new wood, and I think he moved into that quite quickly. There's still plenty, but it's what's it come down to now? It's still probably 50% for up to 50% for the village wines, between 50 and 2/3 for the Premier Cruise, and I think it's 2/3, 2 new barrels in 3, for example, for Romanee Saint Vivant. So it's a little bit less than it was in his father's time. And what I think changed was that the glossy opulence of Sylvain Cathiard's style gradually disappeared, and instead you get something which is a little bit more tightly wound. You get a little bit more multiple layers, a little bit more concentration, and a bit more structure, all of which I think are good things in the long-term aging of the wine, but make them fractionally less sexy when they first appear in the marketplace. So I don't disagree at all with this slightly different evolution of direction that Sebastien has taken on board. So the two wines that you've got to taste are 2017s, I believe. You've got 3 wines to taste. There's a blind one as well. And since I haven't got it in front of me, you'll forgive me if I don't guess it blind. But Michael, I had a guess at an earlier stage when you were maybe going to have a look at a blind Romanee Saint Vivant 2000. I can have a guess what that wine might have been. But I don't know what your blind wine is now with the 17s. But is it a 2017 as well? You'll never get that, guys. No chance. Haha. Okay, you've got two blind wines then, do you? Do you have 4 wines? Okay, so you've got 2 17s that you know about and 2 blind wines. Fun. So the 17s, as you know, it's a vintage with a slightly bigger yield, wines which are friendly and open early. So you could say that in that sense it replicates 2000. And it'll be interesting to see if you feel you get the same difference between the Malconsorts and the Saint Vivant as you got in the 2000 vintage. Do you? Firstly, of course, we've moved on by 17 years from 2000 or 8 years from 2009. But do you still feel you're broadly in the same style, or do you think this marks a really different style?
It tastes different to me.
I think it's a different style.
It tastes very different.
Yeah.
Patrick, what do you like? Which one do you like?
I like first one.
The first one, right?
Yeah, the first one I like.
Patrick likes the father style.
Right. Yeah. More than the son. So yeah. I mean, I do believe in the aging potential of the Sun Star, but you're also saying that the fathers have aged nicely, though without, in my opinion, necessarily adding vastly more. I must have a look. I'm not sure if I still got any 2000s in my cellar, but I've probably definitely got some wines from Dad, and I will check that out even as we speak. What about the difference between the Malconsorts and the Romanee Saint Vivant? Do you think that the Malconsorts still has the greater energy of the two, or are they, or do you prefer the Romanee Saint Vivant?
I'll let others comment, but I feel he's got the best Malconsort. I mean, that's
by far.
There's structure, there's density, there's weight, there's.
Yeah.
So I'm also very curious about the blind that's coming. Whereas the Romanee Saint Vivant, I guess my question to you is his Romanee Saint Vivant ideally located within Romanee Saint Vivant? Is it all equal within?
No, I mean it's pretty much equal.
Okay.
So no, I wouldn't anticipate any difference according to where you are.
Right.
Yeah.
So then maybe the winemaking style coupled with the structure that you've got in the Malconsort, that is such a perfect combination. Whereas it's a very central style of winemaking coupled with the Romanee Saint Vivant. Maybe that's double, because RSV is a very perfumed wine. But I find the Malconsort, the structure and the weight, it's intense, right? But then you've got this delicacy that kind of overlays it, which is really amazing combo.
No, you make me wish I were there, but still, I don't know.
I've sold the dinner, haven't I?
Hey. Right. Now, should we take a little look at the other 2 wines? 2 blinders. So, they could be different vineyards from Cathiard. They could be different. The Cathiard vineyards from somebody else. They could be.
One glass.
Yeah.
Jasper, is the wine drinking different, or is it I guess like the farming of it? You said they changed to organic, so like the wine has changed.
I think it's inevitably changed just in so far as that it's one person doing it rather than another person. But I don't think there have been. I mean, it's still all destemmed. But there is one thing we could actually come to, is that I'm not sure about Sylvain, but Sebastien Cathiard is one of the later pickers. He says he wants to wait until the wines are ripe. And certainly in 2020, I felt it was too late. So I was intrigued to go and taste his 2021s earlier this week. And I prefer his 21s, which will be in general a less famous vintage, to his 2020s. Because the late picking ensured that the grapes did get sufficiently ripe, but didn't take it too far. And what is clear that he, I think, listened either to some of the general criticisms of 2020, or indeed to how he found his own wines in that year when they were up at sort of 14.5 to 15 alcohol. In 2022, another hot, dry year, his wines have come in at 12.5, 13 alcohol, which is much better. So I'm looking forward to tasting them next year. So that is one area where I felt that he was maybe not going in the right direction, where it sounds as though he has actually paid attention and will get back on the straight and narrow. The other thing he's done, which I should tell you about, is that he has just bought vast amounts of land up in the hills above in the Haute-Côte de Nuits, and he's built an entire new winery building just for he's got 5 hectares of Haute-Côte de Nuits. So he now has 8 hectares in total of generic Burgundy, and then 4 hectares of the famous vineyards, which is important because he felt he could afford to buy some Haute-Côte de Nuits style vineyards, whereas he couldn't afford to buy nowadays Premier Cru or Grand Cru. And secondly, if global warming continues, then he's going to get later ripening vineyards, which will survive well in the hot periods. Anyway, so that's the future at the Domaine. But immediately in the short term, you've got 2 blind wines. Michael, are you going to give any clue at all?
Same vintage, same vineyard.
Right.
I mean, it couldn't get more specific than that. But I've been put these 2 side by side to these guys, and I can already see the reaction. So,
do you think that one of the producers, people who don't know, do you think one of the producers is Cathiard or neither is Cathiard?
I'm gonna let my say neither is Cathiard. So,
Give it some time.
give it some time. One of them is Cathiard.
The first one. Yeah.
Which one?
The first one.
The first one, 4.
The second one's coming. Yeah, it needs some time.
I don't know about you, but I like to say.
No pressure, guys. No pressure.
Jasper, while we're tasting it, like has Sebastien changed in terms of we're talking winemaking in terms of destemming and using new oak. Has that changed or is it still the same?
At Cathiard?
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's still destemmed 100%, and the new oak is a little bit less. Still uses plenty, but I will. Michael's told me what the wine is, so I would think it would have been 2/3 new oak at that time. I'm going to see if I can find a tasting note on it that might tell me.
We don't know yet.
so the first one is Cathiard.
That's what this one's, yeah.
So the first one is Cathiard.
No, don't list.
This one's a little bit too bold.
Right, my note doesn't tell me whether what it was, but I would expect that to have been 2/3 new oak at that point. Certainly at least half. So it might be slightly less than Father's Time, but yes, no, Father's Time, the 2000s would be made with 100% new oak. But the destemming remains the same. And the basic principles are the same. Length of élevage through a second winter, the same. So yeah, nothing too different. But you have a different person doing it. So just all those, every single second of your life, you're making without realizing it tiny little decisions about something, and that does have a role when it comes to how the wines turn out at the end. Right, so most people are saying that the first wine of the 2 is Cathiard. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
The second one's a little bit more tannic.
Second one's more tannic. Okay, interesting.
The second one has some savory notes, the first one doesn't.
First one has no savory notes.
Because it doesn't mean it's not to me, whereas
So might you think that there's different? I mean,
Like,
do you think that both of these stemmed, or that one is with stem?
For that first, and we can think of the second one.
well, they both mount.
You all know what B and C is, right?
Yes,
They both mount, right?
Your C is which one? The second one.
Second one, yeah.
The second one is the C, right?
yes.
I understand.
C is the Cathiard.
Really?
Hey,
So who is the other one?
well, yeah, the other one should be quite different. I mean, I would have expected.
It's Cathiard. The second
C, yeah.
So, okay, so the first one was perhaps more perfumed, and the second one a little bit more tighter in structure. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
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 So it just might be that the perfume is coming from the use of stems of whole clusters.
Who uses stems and all?
New Jack.
Oh.
Who said Dujac? Give the man a prize.
Yeah,
New Jack.
Yeah, mind you, it could also have been De Monte would have used stems too. So yeah, and any guess at the vintage?
10?
10,
Oh, naturally-
10 would still have been the father, so it's not 10.
Something new.
Yeah.
Only because I feel like
You should give it to
Yeah.
him. You should give it to him. That's what they call.
Yeah.
Yeah, 15.
15?
15.
yeah.
Right, so everybody got right first time the fact that they were Malconsorts 2015 from Dujac and from Cathiard. So
Winner.
all passed your Master of Wine exams. But,
Dujac has improved. Like Dujac Mounts has improved.
This one doesn't grow, right?
It's yeah, because we tasted the 05 before, but the 15 is a lot better.
Oh, sure, but 05 was the very first vintage. They didn't, in fact, have everything in place then. So the 05 is under the Dujac Fils Père label. And they would only have got in, they wouldn't have run the vineyard, I don't think, in 05. They probably just got the fruit coming into harvest. So that wouldn't be a fair comparison. I think, if you were looking, if you're talking about 9 and 10 and so on, then by then that would be the even from 06, but give them 2 or 3 years just to get a handle on the vineyard. So yeah, so I would expect the 15 to be better than the 05.
Do you guys prefer Dujac or the Cathiard?
So right now drinking it, probably Dujac.
it's more accessible.
More accessible.
It's a bit. Sam's doing a face that says he disagrees.
I think it was a little bit too cold when it was served.
Yeah,
It's warming up, right? It's warming up.
Yeah.
So I think it was an unfair comparison.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So,
But in any case, I mean, nobody should be looking at 2015 as something to drink in the coming days. I mean, it is one of Burgundy's great vintages, and you should keep it a minimum of 5, and I would prefer 10 years from now, and it will keep for 20-25 years. But yeah, but it's not. It's interesting, and I think it is telling in terms of the way Sebastien has actually taken the domain, that the wine is that much more backward, that much more structure, that much less accessible in use than was the case with his father.
But it's kind of like the other, it's kind of like the other way of like the other producers, right? Like other producers like trying to make it more accessible, young, early, more forward. So he's kind of gone the other way, huh?
He's gone a bit the other way, and but frankly, I think that you should make your wine so that when it is ready, it is as good as it can possibly be. So I'm a little bit sad to see people making it to be accessible younger, because I don't think you hit quite the same heights on those conditions. Having said which, certainly looking at restaurant lists in Beaune and the rest of Burgundy, and in many parts of the world, you've only got young vintages on the wine list, so they sort of have to be at least slightly accessible young. But it does detract from the overall potential for greatness from the region. So there we have it. That should be quite interesting. I think it's certainly developed our understanding of what the domain is about across 2 generations. We will see where it goes from here. Any other closing thoughts? Otherwise, I shall leave you to enjoy.
Jasper, I have a question for you. I've noticed a number of critics, when they give their scores, I'm not saying scores is the ultimate, but for Cathiard's wines, they never really hit the 100-point mark. But when you look at the prices in the secondary market, they are well in the 100-point zip code.
Yeah.
For example, some of the RSV is not far off from where you'd find Domaine Sylvain Cathiard's wines or anything comparable, right? So what is it that you think, in your view, wine reviewers or critics are tasting that gives them, let's say they lean to 94, 96 points or 93, 95 or 96, 95, 97, not hitting the 100 when they taste them in barrel or...
Okay, well, then, I mean, almost no Burgundy critics ever give 100, but I mean, we might do a bracket of 96 to 100 in barrel. But there's something about Burgundy that you feel, well, you know, you want to save for the potential in the future for somebody to reach 100. I mean, yeah. So I'm just looking back at my 2002 Romanee Saint Vivant. I gave 97 to. I'm wondering if I've Malconsorts 05 gave 97 to on one of its showings at any rate. That was our 2018 dinner. I mean, I think his wines are, I mean, the tasting note is full of joys. I don't know, maybe with the Sylvain Cathiard wines, they just seem so delicious, so sort of easy in a way, so accessible that the extra points would have been held in reserve for wines where you could feel that there was a huge amount more to gain later on. So that might have been expression, a reasoning behind a certain reticence, yeah, I can't entirely explain it. In terms of the pricing of the Romanee Saint Vivant, of course, it's 0.17 of a hectare, so you do have the rarity thing, which, as we all know, rarity has nothing to do with quality, though it can influence price. I'm actually looking on my website that from 81 Cathiard wines, the 99 Romanee Saint Vivant I gave 98 to, the 02 97, the 05 Malconsorts 97, and then 15 Malconsorts I gave 96 to. There you go. And in terms of tasting things in barrel, there are often scores like sort of 95 to 98, that sort of thing. So I'm pretty high, I must admit. You know more about the marketplace, Michael, than I do. But I'm also... may even occasionally have caused a few movements. I would say, just from the point, I don't think it will show in the marketplace, and I don't wish it to show, but for your own enjoyment, the other vineyard that in the sun's time that I would take a good look at would be the Romanee Premier Cru en Auvergne. Add that into your buying mix. And I still think, in a way, you get the quintessential Cathiard result out of Malconsorts, almost ahead of the Romanee Saint Vivant.
Well, the market just moved.
All right. Hey, we should do one of these with somebody whose prices are far too high, but we like the wines. We should do one, and we should pretend that the wines are all tasting horrible and that we're all going to sell all our wine. The market is about to crash down. See if we can move it the other way while still enjoying the wines. Wouldn't that be nice?
But you know, Jasper, you say that this Malconsorts in the public market, Cathiard's Malconsorts is probably by far the most expensive. Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, he is the reference point for Malconsorts. I think that remains true. even though Etienne de Monti and Dujac are spectacular, and the other producers are all very good. You hardly ever see the Hulot-Nola wine because he's got very little of it, and he tends to bottle it only in Magnum. In fact, he didn't even have enough. He didn't even make one in 2021.
Wow.
Charlotte Hulot-Nola. Okay. I will leave you to it. I think our next definite date is probably early December with Pierre Durocher.
That's very exciting.
And that will be actually with Pierre at his winery. So that's good. The favorite final question, if he were here, I should have asked him that when I saw him, and I forgot. So I think it's best not to take him sort of too far away from where he is. So what Premier Cru vineyard in Vosne Romanee would I most like to see him have? I think I'd love to see him have some Petit Mort. Let's put that into the mix. Obviously, I would be unpopular elsewhere if I said I'd like to see him have some Romanée Conti or La Romanée, but that would not make me popular elsewhere. But let's see if we could find him some Petit Mort and see what would happen with that. But actually, he's thrilled to get all these little vineyards up in the oak coat, and that's going to keep him happy for a little while yet. Okay, well, I'll leave you to enjoy dinner, and I will see you again in early December.